The moment the cork popped off the champagne bottle and ricocheted off the wall in the break room, I already knew Apex Logix wasn't going to pay me. It was Wednesday evening, and the room was packed with people who hadn't contributed a single line of code to the project. Yet they were the loudest ones celebrating. The analytics platform I had built from the ground up, block by block, was finally live. On the flat screen mounted above the coffee machine, the real-time usage metrics were rolling in, climbing higher and higher until they reached 400% above our initial projections. People were laughing, taking selfies, and passing around foil balloons. I stood in the corner, sipping lukewarm club soda, watching my hard work become a corporate victory lap. For managers who couldn't explain the difference between a relational database and a spreadsheet. I was 48 years old, and I had been with Apex Logix for 12 years, back when the entire company operated out of a tiny 3-room office. I had built their data pipeline, optimized their query speeds, and kept their servers running through countless late-night crashes. I was tired, but I was proud of what I had built. That pride lasted until Roger Kress, the VP of Operations, walked into the break room. Roger was 41 years old, wore a $900 suit that looked like it was wearing him, and carried a permanent smirk that made you want to check your pockets after he spoke. He walked straight over to me, clapped me on the shoulder with a heavy hand, and gestured toward the screen. He told me the system looked incredible, but then he lowered his voice. He said my Q2 performance bonus of $45,000 wasn't going to clear this cycle. He claimed it was a policy issue, something about upper-level management cracking down on post-launch compensation adjustments, and told me not to take it personally. I looked at his eyes and saw the truth. He had already spent my bonus on his own department's budget to make himself look good to the board. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table or threaten to delete the source code. I just looked at Roger, nodded slowly, and told him I understood. What Roger didn't understand was that he had just pulled the pin on a legal grenade that I had buried in the foundation of the platform 2 years ago. Back then, Roger had tried to outsource our entire database structure to a cheap contractor group based in Austin. I had discovered his plan through a misdirected Slack thread where Roger called me an expensive liability and said they would replace me once the transition was complete. To protect myself, I had contacted our third-party analytics licensing vendor, Ether Analytics, to rewrite the software licensing terms. I spent 2 weeks negotiating the contract terms, and I made sure they included Appendix D, Clause 13.2d. The clause was simple. If George Vance, the designated technical lead, was removed from compensated employment status for any period exceeding 72 hours, the license agreement would become null and void, and all API access would be immediately terminated. Roger had signed the final document without reading a single word of the legal text, assuming it was just boilerplate language. I walked back to my desk, the festive noise of the break room fading behind me. My inbox was already filling up with congratulatory messages and requests for quick calls from people who suddenly wanted to know how to pull reports from the new pipeline. I fulfilled every request, keeping my voice calm and professional. Inside, however, I was looking at the timeline. Roger's decision to withhold my $45,000 bonus meant my compensated employment status was officially disrupted. The 72-hour countdown had already started the moment he processed the payment freeze. I opened my encrypted personal folder, extracted the PDF copy of the executed contract with Ether Analytics, and highlighted the specific lines in Appendix D. The contract was signed and timestamped. It was an ironclad, legally binding document. If the company didn't pay me, they didn't have a license to run their business. I opened a new email, addressed it to our lead internal legal counsel, Sarah Higgins, and typed a simple subject line, FYI, potential compliance issue. In the body of the email, I wrote a brief, dispassionate note. I told Sarah that she should review the compensation requirements in Appendix D of the Ether Analytics license to ensure we weren't facing any exposure. I attached the PDF contract and hit send. I didn't run to HR, and I didn't complain to my coworkers. I just sat back in my chair and watched the clock. The system was running perfectly, but the legal framework holding it up was already beginning to fracture. Roger thought he had saved the company $45. Zero, but he had actually initiated a countdown that would cost them millions. Thursday morning smelled like stale coffee and corporate denial. The confetti from the launch party had barely been cleaned up when the company-wide emails began. The subject lines were filled with phrases like incredible teamwork and historic milestone for the organization. In every message, the same pattern repeated itself. Senior leadership was taking credit for my work. By 10:06 a.m., the official launch overview document was sent out. It was a beautiful PDF filled with database architecture diagrams I had custom designed, using the color scheme I had chosen, and summarizing metrics pulled directly from the system I had spent the last 2 years building. There was a 2-page summary of the data architecture, written in the third person, as if the entire platform had been found in a field instead of engineered during my unpaid weekends. Nowhere did my name appear. Instead, the document was signed by Roger Kress and a couple of product leads who couldn't read a query if their lives depended on it. Roger had even used phrases I had written in Slack messages weeks ago, copy-pasting my technical explanations verbatim. My contribution had been reduced to a generic mention of technical staff input. I was no longer a person to them. I was just a footnote in Roger's promotion folder. I didn't say anything in the public Slack channels. I didn't send passive-aggressive messages or post emojis. Instead, I created a folder on my local machine and labeled it simply documentation. I began saving copies of Slack conversations, initial design drafts, Git commit logs, and screenshots of version histories, showing my name next to every major code commit. I wasn't doing this out of anger. I was doing it to prepare. A corporate war doesn't start with a loud confrontation. It starts with someone quietly gathering evidence. By noon, the first signs of trouble began to show. One of the database administrators asked in the public channel if anyone had verified the final licensing terms with Ether Analytics. He mentioned that some clauses in Appendix D looked unusual. He asked if legal had reviewed the terms. I kept my eyes on my monitors, focusing on standard system maintenance, and said nothing. A project manager replied that legal had likely reviewed it and that we shouldn't worry about it since the system was up and running. I smiled slightly at that. It was the kind of smile you might give someone who is about to walk into a glass door. I took my lunch late, around 1:45 p.m., when the break room was empty. The leftover cake from the party was still sitting on the counter, its chocolate frosting drying out under the fluorescent lights. The word success was written across the top in red icing. The letters were shaky, as if they had been drawn in a hurry. I sat by the window, watching HR staff talk to sales reps in the hallway. Roger walked by, laughing loudly while talking on his Bluetooth headset. He didn't look at me, and I didn't expect him to. In his mind, I had already served my purpose. My code was running, and I could now be pushed aside. Later that afternoon, the isolation became official. I noticed a notification indicating that I had been removed from the data operations Slack channel. A simple banner appeared telling me that I no longer had access to that workspace. Shortly after, the invite for the daily stand-up meeting disappeared from my calendar. I only realized it when a notification popped up, showing that a Zoom meeting had started without me. Roger was trying to contain the situation by cutting off my access to the rest of the team, hoping I would become discouraged and resign. Instead of panic, I felt a calm sense of focus. I opened a local spreadsheet and titled it System Dependencies. I began listing every critical process that relied on the database system I had built. I wrote down the daily sales reporting pipeline that the finance department used every morning. I listed the customer retention metrics that the marketing team monitored. I documented the system status tools that kept the servers stable. I noted the data transformation routines that updated our reports every hour. By the end of the day, I had listed 43 separate systems that were directly dependent on my pipeline. By midnight, that list had grown to 92. I included a column indicating what would happen to each system if the database license was revoked. The answer was simple. They would all stop functioning within 72 hours. Roger's attempt to freeze me out was a massive gamble, and he had no idea what the stakes actually were. I spent the rest of the night saving my work logs and encrypting the dependency maps. I wanted to ensure that when the platform went down, they would have no way to repair it without me. The meeting on Friday afternoon was not listed on any public calendar. There was no calendar invitation, no preparation document, and no Slack notifications. Instead, it was organized through quiet requests from the legal department. Sarah Higgins, our lead internal legal counsel, walked through the office and personally gathered a small group of people into conference room C. The meeting included Roger Kress, a senior HR representative, and a junior finance analyst who had recently graduated and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I was not invited to the meeting, but I did not need to be. I knew exactly what document was open on Sarah's screen. It was the Ether Analytics license contract, specifically Appendix Ds. Sarah sat at the end of the conference table, her laptop open in front of her, looking calm and serious. She was someone who valued compliance and took legal obligations very seriously. She had spent hours analyzing the licensing structure, and her expression was completely neutral. Sarah started the meeting immediately. She stated that she wanted to verify the employment status of George Vance. She asked the HR representative if I was currently active and being compensated according to my employment agreement. The HR representative replied that I was indeed active and had not been terminated. Sarah did not look satisfied with that answer. She clarified that she was asking specifically if I had been paid my full compensation, including any performance-based incentives. The finance analyst opened a spreadsheet, frowned, and admitted that my Q2 performance bonus of $45,000 was still listed as under review, and no payment had been made. Roger immediately tried to downplay the issue, claiming that my bonus was simply undergoing a standard evaluation process to ensure it met all post-launch criteria. He argued that the delay was standard procedure and that the company had a right to verify metrics before releasing funds. Sarah closed her laptop. The sound of the lid closing was quiet, but it filled the room with tension. She looked at Roger and explained that if I was not paid my bonus, the company was in direct breach of the licensing agreement. The HR representative asked what she meant. Sarah explained Clause 13.2d of the contract. She pointed out that the agreement required me to be in compensated employment status for the license to remain valid. If I remained unpaid for more than 72 hours, the agreement would become null and void, and our legal access to the database infrastructure would be terminated immediately. Roger tried to laugh, calling it standard boilerplate language that was rarely enforced in the industry. Sarah replied that it was not boilerplate. She informed him that she had reviewed the contract thoroughly and that the clause was fully enforceable. She noted that Ether Analytics was known for auditing clients to protect their intellectual property. She explained the consequences of operating the system without a valid license. She pointed out that using the platform without a license was a federal copyright violation under 17 U.S.C. 106 and a patent violation under 35 U.S.C. 271. It would mean that every dashboard, every financial report, and every investor presentation relying on that data would be legally compromised. She told Roger that he had exposed the company to massive liability. She pointed out that he had signed the payroll freeze form himself, which meant he was directly responsible for the situation. She warned him that if Ether Analytics audited Apex Logics, they could demand immediate termination of all database access, bringing our operations to a complete standstill. The junior finance analyst looked terrified, realizing the scale of the problem. Roger tried to argue that there must be a grace period, but Sarah informed him that the 72-hour window was almost up. It had started when the bonus was officially withheld on Wednesday afternoon at 5 p.m., and it would expire on Saturday at 5 p.m. Sarah stood up and adjusted her jacket. She announced that she was going to escalate the issue to the CEO immediately. She told Roger that if I was not paid by the end of the day, she would have to notify our external legal counsel and the compliance team at Ether Analytics on EASE about the breach. She warned them that if they thought I was bluffing, they should read the rest of the agreement. She pointed out that I had written the technical specifications myself and knew the system's vulnerabilities. She walked out of the room, leaving Roger staring at his hands in silence. Outside the conference room, the rest of the office continued to work, unaware that their entire data platform was sitting on a legal time bomb. I watched Roger leave the conference room a few minutes later, his face flushed and his usual confident stride completely gone. He didn't say a word to anyone. The system blackout began in the early hours of Monday morning. It started with a missed report at 3:12 a.m. The automated global sales reconciliation report, which usually arrived in the chief financial officer's inbox like clockwork, simply failed to appear. There was no error message, no database crash alert, and no system warning. By 3:34 a.m., a junior engineer working the night shift posted a message in the DevOps Slack channel asking if the dashboards were down. By 4 a.m., the channel was flooded with alerts. The database team was unable to access the analytics clusters. The logs showed no recent deployments or infrastructure failures, but the database calls were throwing 4,003 authorization errors. The license validation server had rejected our credentials. Every executive dashboard, every real-time metrics board, and every financial model refreshed with a red banner that read, "License unrecognized. Contact account holder." The Ether Analytics automated verification system had done its job. On Saturday at 5 p.m., the 72-hour grace period had expired. Because my $45,000 bonus remained unpaid, the system registered my compensated employment status as disrupted. The licensing server automatically revoked the API keys. By the time the rest of the company arrived at the office, the system was dead. The support channel was a mess of confused queries, with engineers trying to reboot servers and refresh keys, completely unaware that the issue was legal, not technical. I arrived at my normal time, around 8 a.m., carrying my bag and my laptop. The office was in a state of chaos. Managers were running down hallways, and engineers were calling support lines, trying to find out why the vendor had cut off our access. I walked to the break room, poured myself a cup of office coffee, and sat down at the table. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't celebrating. I simply sat there, calm and quiet, watching the panic unfold. I had documented everything, and my hands were clean. I knew that my spreadsheets and code commits were safely backed up. At 8:02 a.m., Sarah Higgins walked past the break room heading toward the CEO's office. She was carrying a black binder containing the licensing agreements and my communication history. I could see them through the glass walls. Sarah was speaking quietly, her face serious, while the CEO listened with a look of growing concern. By 8:15 a.m., an emergency meeting was called in the executive conference room. The meeting was in person only, and the email invite carried a simple subject line, "Urgent." I was not included in the invite, but my presence was felt. Inside the conference room, Roger Kress tried to explain the situation as a temporary technical glitch. He told the CEO that Ether Analytics was having a server issue and that our engineering team was working with their support to resolve it. Sarah slid the printed contract across the table, pointing directly to Appendix D. She informed the CEO that the issue was not a technical glitch, but a compliance breach. She explained that the license had been revoked because my Q2 performance bonus of $45,000 had not been paid, violating Clause 13.2d. The CEO turned to the finance representative and asked if I was still on payroll. The representative confirmed that I was employed, but admitted that my Q2 bonus had been frozen by Roger's department. Roger tried to speak, claiming that the bonus was still being evaluated, but the CEO waved him off immediately, demanding that he stop making excuses. The CEO asked Sarah if there was a quick fix, or if we could negotiate a grace period with the vendor. Sarah shook her head, explaining that the 72-hour window had already expired on Saturday. She informed him that Ether Analytics would not restore access until my compensation status was resolved and the contract compliance terms were met. She warned them that operating the platform without a license exposed the company to severe legal liability under federal copyright laws. Roger was sweating, looking at the spreadsheet of system dependencies that Sarah had attached to her report. The spreadsheet showed that 92 separate business systems were now offline, including the sales tracking pipeline, the forecasting models, and the customer database. Without those systems, the company could not generate its quarterly reports for the upcoming board meeting. The CEO looked at Roger and asked why he hadn't been informed about this clause earlier. Roger mumbled that he didn't realize the clause was enforceable and that he thought it was just standard legal language. Sarah reminded him, that I had flagged the issue in writing twice, once in a Slack channel and once in an email to Roger's department weeks before the launch. She told the CEO that the breach was entirely avoidable, but Roger had chosen to ignore the warnings to save a minor bonus. The room fell silent as the executives realized the scale of the disaster. Roger had tried to save $45,000, and in doing so, he had brought the entire company's data operations to a halt, leaving the board and key investors completely in the dark. By Monday afternoon, the quiet desperation in the building had turned into complete panic. The office felt like a funeral home, with people whispering in corners and phones ringing unanswered. Around 11:04 a.m., HR tried to bypass the compliance system. They processed a manual payroll adjustment to pay me the $45,000 bonus, backdating the timestamp in the database to make it appear as though the payment had been completed before the weekend deadline. They thought they could resolve a major licensing breach with a simple administrative trick. Sarah Higgins was not fooled. She immediately sent a company-wide email to all senior leadership. She stated that the retroactive payment did not resolve the breach under Clause 13.2d. The timestamp payment logs confirmed the violation, and the platform remained unlicensed. She warned them that the compliance audit would proceed, and Ether Analytics had already logged the unlicensed database access. Meanwhile, Roger tried a different approach to salvage his own career. He sent Toby Jenkins, a 25-year-old junior HR assistant, to my desk. Toby looked terrified, holding a printed form in his hands and sweating. He asked if I could help the team write some transition documentation for the analytics pipeline, claiming they needed to keep the system moving while they sorted out the licensing issue. I looked at Toby and explained that, since the platform was in breach status, I could not legally access the database or write documentation for it. I told him that doing so would make me complicit in the unlicensed distribution of the software, exposing me to personal liability. I advised him to tell Roger not to send a junior staffer who didn't understand the legal definition of a contract breach. Toby nodded quickly, his face turning red, and walked away. I then logged into my terminal and deleted my personal credentials from the sandbox instances, ensuring that no one could use my account to access the system. The call came at 6:42 p.m. I was at home, pouring a glass of wine and feeding my cat when my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, indicating a direct line from the executive suite. I answered, and the CEO's voice came through the speaker. He sounded tired and stressed, his usual confident tone replaced by sheer exhaustion. He didn't bother with introductions or greetings. He simply asked what it would take to resolve the situation and get the database back online immediately. I walked to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. I had already prepared a buyout proposal with my attorney. I told the CEO that I was sending him the document now and that the terms were non-negotiable. The document contained 3 specific demands. First, the immediate wire transfer of my unpaid Q2 bonus of $45,000, along with a 40% breach penalty of $18,000, bringing the total back payment to $63,000. Second, a buyout payment of $250,000 to release the licensing clause and transfer my technical specifications to Apex Logix. Third, a written statement acknowledging my contributions to the platform to be read aloud at the next company-wide meeting. The total financial package was $313,000. I heard the CEO exhale through the phone as he read the numbers. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence on the line. Then he spoke quietly, admitting that they should have just paid me the bonus in the first place. I didn't gloat and I didn't argue. I simply informed him that he had until the close of business tomorrow to process the wire transfer. I warned him that if the payment was not confirmed by then, I would authorize Ether Analytics to proceed with the formal breach escalation. I hung up the phone and closed my laptop. The database remained offline that night. The board members did not receive their Q3 metrics, and the sales team was unable to track their conversions. The dashboards continued to display the licensing error. The next morning, the wire transfer cleared, and Sarah Higgins personally verified the compliance update. The licensing server restored access, and the system came back online. Roger was demoted by the end of the week, and I walked away with my payout, ready for a fresh start. It was a clean exit, and I knew that my reputation in the industry remained completely intact. I sat on my porch enjoying the quiet evening, knowing that the system I had built was speaking for me louder than any argument ever could. Roger had tried to treat me as a replaceable resource, but he had ended up proving that I was the only person keeping the company's data operations running. They had broken a contract, and now they were forced to pay for their mistakes on my terms. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.